Mike, I saw a job listing the other day and immediately thought of you. I know you've been kind of looking around to see what's up there since you finished the book. Fox News is hiring a freelance comedy writer for Greg Gutfeld's show. He has this like nightly show on Fox News that I guess is supposed to be the conservative like Colbert show or Jimmy Kimmel show. But they are looking for a, quote, proactive individual who can write smart, crisp copy with an edge.
I've been waiting for this my whole life. It's like, you know, walking around and being a man with no destiny, this man boy just walking the earth, just purposeless until this moment.
Can't think of anyone better to feed Greg Gutfeld his zingers. You know, I can't imagine it's that hard, right? It's Bernie Sanders said something today. Karl Marx, remember that guy? And then you just, that's it. You're done, right?
Yeah, they probably put like electrodes on your body and shock you every time the joke doesn't land. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar, if you've seen Tim Heidegger's routine, No More Bullshit, but that was like one of the first things I thought of where he plays this kind of conservative comic, and he'd be like, "My wife wanted to go to the opera. You believe that? So yeah, I got her a ticket. And then I come in, the guy's like, fa la 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 la. I said, hey, shut the fuck up." Right? Like these things are just like, where the comedy is just reduced to pure toxic masculinity and there's just nothing else. He's very good at doing that bit. That's what I thought about. You know, it is the people who are going to apply to that, I'm going to guess, are people who are in strong need of alcohol.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared Holt.
I'm Mike Hayden.
Thanks for being here another week. This episode is coming out on Inauguration Day in DC, and there are so many parties, so much money just flying through the air. You know, when this comes out, Mike, you'll actually be in DC, and I knew you were a huge Trump fan. You know, that's kind of what you're notorious for, but I was surprised. What are you going to be doing there? What drew you to the nation's capital on this big day?
Well, it's more of a scientific experiment, really, which is to see how Trumpers respond to negative 14-degree wind chill factor and possibly talk to them about it. Yeah, I mean, I was talking about this to our mutual friend, Hannah Gase, and, I've done a lot of investigations, long investigations. You've done investigations as well that take a long time and unearth important things. But we shouldn't trivialize vibe reporting on vibes, because the future historians don't know what the vibe is really going to be on come Monday. And we are the people who are going to be able to convey it. So I am very interested in just seeing the vibe, what it's like when Trump takes power surrounded by so many other very wealthy people. What is that moment like, and how are people going to respond to it?
You've told me you're taking a microphone. You know, well, I'm eager to see if you're able to bring back interviews, but, you know, a lot of the logistics are changing because of the weather. So we'll see what comes of that. But at the very least, I will be very eager to get the vibe check from you next week.
Yeah, it's going to be a full-on vibe check.
So inauguration, it's a big day. We talked last episode with Kevin Cruz about what this next administration might look like in the early days and what kind of historical parallels may or may not exist. Go check that out if you haven't already. This inauguration has been billed sometimes explicitly by some of his supporters as a coronation. It is getting showered with big money from corporate leaders, major donors. The New York Times reported on the 8th, I'm sure this number has gone up by now, that it had raised more than $170 million for the inauguration, which is well and above the norm. Axios reported big contributing factor to that is cryptocurrency people who bought Bitcoin and whatever meme dog coin, fart coin, whatever it may be at the right time, and have found themselves with a lot of money and thinking this next government is going to, help their next rug pull. And it's also set to feature, front and center giant tech industry leaders like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, of course, Elon Musk. They're going to be hosting parties, appearing around the ceremony. And it's just, to me, it's kind of rich because if you listen to some of the like baby brain pundits, the Trump movement is supposed to represent this like social hunger for populism. And a lot of Trump supporters are under this belief that he's going to, really stick up for them and fight back against all these like corrupt powers in society. But all of the people that, in these comic book tales, Trump, I guess, is supposedly about to go to war with are popping champagne in the C-suite and raining dollar bills on all these organizations around him.
Historically, this has never gone poorly, right? Like we've never had a situation where a bunch of oligarchs, in the world where a bunch of oligarchs swarm around a guy who's got authoritarian ambitions and promises to lead a sort of populist chapter in the country. That never ends poorly, of course.
Yeah, every example I can think of through history, it's gone pretty well for everyone, I think, right?
Never ends with people starving. I think like one thing that comes to mind here to bring it to something somewhat hopeful, positive, an idea for the idea board. If anybody's listening that has any power over anything, when you think about Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, and there was that big thing about $27 a month, and it became almost like a joke punchline by the end, right? People are sort of like, oh my God, with this $27. But if all these corporations and all these extremely wealthy people are going to be surrounding themselves around Trump during these next 4 years, wouldn't it be very powerful to run a kind of grassroots campaign like that, no matter who the opponent of Trump is, as an us versus them? Because I personally think that a lot of people are getting kind of tired of these tech CEOs. They're pretty disgusted by them. And that even includes many people who have voted for Trump. So to me, I think, look at that 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, how the message was able to unite a lot of people, how it was able to inspire people to open up their wallets and bring out small donations, and look at that as a way to kind of take on Trump. And I think nothing would frustrate him or his fans more.
So in DC this weekend, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, these are billionaires that have taken turns licking the proverbial boot of Trump and cozying up and, seeming to adjust their businesses to try to accommodate this next administration and its goals. Another tech CEO is the CEO of TikTok. He will be at the inauguration.
Of course he will.
That's a situation where there's a little bit more at stake, and I feel like the play is maybe a bit more understandable. The Supreme Court 9-0 on Friday said, yeah, it's totally cool if the U.S. government wants to ban TikTok. That's fine, because it's about foreign interest or national security, quote unquote, concerns. Even though I think most of them are ridiculous and poorly supported. And it's not about content, so it's not a First Amendment issue, actually. And puzzlingly, even though Biden signed the legislation that would force a sale or ban it, and then went to court and argued in favor of it, it went back to his desk at the end of last week, and they're just passing the buck onto the Trump administration. I think, every politician with a pulse understands how wildly unpopular this ban is. And maybe they just don't want to hold the bag. But it does posture Trump up to swing in and potentially be, portray himself as the hero who saved TikTok.
This is obviously an unfolding story, and it's possible by the time that you listen to it, there will be more information that we don't have yet. But my quick take on it is that it puts Trump in a very powerful position, as most things do at this moment. And the reason why is because Trump holds the key to this site's existence. And if he wants to, I mean, you say, jump, they're going to say how high, right? They will allow the type of content that he wants on there, or the algorithms do what he wants for pure survival reasons. You cannot trust TikTok after this to kind of have its own policies around speech and this and that, and what gets seen on TikTok and the way it's seen, what gets promoted through its algorithm. You can't trust it after this, because you know that they are beholden. Their life is in the hands of this one guy.
Yeah. And even though I'm sure, maybe less sure, that, the Trump administration isn't going to be dictating the policy there, you have to understand that if the company continues on, thanks to Trump, they're effectively operating with a gun held to their head, right?
Right.
The way it would be saved is by executive order, which could be rescinded at any time, right? So it's like totally ideal for Trump, because it's what I'm sure they wish they could do to all these tech companies, which is essentially hold them hostage.
We can't prove that Trump can, shape their algorithm, shape the speech directly. But we do know that if TikTok pisses him off, he can immediately just cut them loose, right? That's what I mean by tremendous power. So could be that the guy hates Trump, although I doubt it. Could be that he did. Let's say he hates Trump. Trump holds the power to destroy the company, period. And that, you don't need to think much deeper than that.
So last thing before we get to our interview with Parker Malloy, Biden gave his farewell address last week, televised. In this one, giving some warnings about the future of the country. So Biden has spoken at length before about, attacks on democracy and stuff. In his farewell address, he used some language that seemed to be a bit more explicit than is typical.
I'm equally concerned about the potential rise of a tech industrial complex that could pose real dangers for our country as well. Americans are being buried under an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation, enabling the abuse of power. The free press is crumbling. Editors are disappearing. Social media is giving up on fact-checking. The truth is smothered by lies told for power and for profit. We must hold the social platforms accountable to protect our children, our families, and our very democracy from the abuse of power.
It just kind of struck me as a interesting message to close out on, considering that a lot of people, and I would argue probably rightfully so, sort of attribute Trump to failures of the Democrats, not necessarily to Trump's, crazy political savvy strategy kind of thing.
Right. I agree with you. Now, what I would say that it's a good, it's a good statement. And like I said, I would like to have heard it earlier. The essential problem with it, and I don't fault Biden in particular for this, but what is the solution, right? What's the solution? The solution is to vote for Democrats. That seems to be the solution that they always come up with. And understandably, they're like, we can fix this, right? And we see where we've gotten, right? We have a very weak opposition party to this new right-wing populist thing that's emerged in this country. And I'm scared that Democrats can't actually do it. And if it's not the Democrats who can take it on, what concerns me is that the only other thing is unrest, because it could be that things get bad in this country, and there's all kinds of disruption relative to economic crashes and whatever else, and then you could have like something from the ground that attacks us. But as long as things are normal, in quotes, we're reliant still on the Democrats. We're still reliant on somebody to step it up and run against Trumpism. And at the same time we're doing that, we're also, out of the other side of our mouth, whether we're Democrats or we're just left liberal, anything, is the possibility that we won't get a chance to even vote in 2028. And I'm not saying that that's definitely going to be the case, but the fact that it's even being discussed, the fact that people are concerned about democracy in that sense, tells me that we need a better solution than just, okay, we'll just vote for the next Democrat that comes along, maybe Kamala 2.0. That is not enough to take on this kind of connection between corporations and right-wing populists.
We're going to talk about some of those connections, particularly as it connects to legacy media. I'm talking newspapers, cable news outlets. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Before we start, though, I do have to ask, have you put in an application for the freelance comedy writing gig on the Gutfield show?
I haven't, because I wouldn't want to take that job away from the hardworking writers over there at Fox News.
Better shot for me, then.
Yeah.
So, the Washington Post, the New York Times, as local papers die, the country becomes more and more dependent on these big national outlets. And what's happening at them isn't especially great. But can you catch us up on what's happening at the two big papers of record in the U.S.? I mean, we could talk about the Wall Street Journal too, but as a Rupert Murdoch publication, I feel like most people kind of know what's going on with that already.
Yeah. I feel like the Wall Street Journal and New York Post are kind of the types of papers that the New York Times and Washington Post are turning into, frankly.
Yeah.
I mean, where to even start with this? Because you've got going back to last year at the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos installed Will Lewis to run the show over there, basically. And so Will Lewis is a Murdoch guy, came from that whole world, conservative media, that sort of stuff. And he immediately pushed out the executive editor, Sally Busby, and announced a replacement. I think his name's Matt Murray, who's another kind of conservative British dude. So it's been interesting watching as the Post kind of adapts to its new leadership. Underneath it all, you've seen a lot of people starting to kind of leave. You've seen Bezos himself insert himself into the paper, such as stopping the paper from printing an endorsement during the presidential race. And then this week, there was a story that I couldn't kind of stop laughing about, and it was about how the Post is trying to rebrand for the Trump era. Essentially, they have a new mission statement to reach all of America, riveting storytelling for all of America. They set a goal, which this is the part that kind of makes me laugh. They set a goal of reaching 200 million paying users. Okay,
paying users?
Paying users, yeah. And so to put that in context, the Washington Post currently has fewer than 3 million digital subscribers. So imagine going from saying we want to hit 10 million. That sounds doable. That would put them in the same league as the New York Times, which has 11 million. But no, 200 million.
Is the implication there, since it's for everybody or whatever, that they're going to tap into these Trump supporters who view them as being communists, scum, whatever? They're gonna flip those people and turn them into paying subscribers.
I mean, that seems to be the argument. That there was in this New York Times report about it. Let's see. Mr. Bezos has expressed hopes the Post would be read by more blue-collar Americans who live outside coastal cities, mentioning people like firefighters in Cleveland. He has also said that he's interested in expanding the Post's audience among conservatives. So even if you're reaching this entirely new audience, I would say doubling your current subscriber base sounds like a big goal in itself, not expanding it to 60 times as large. It's just so out of touch with reality, but that kind of seems to be what's going on over at the Post. I mean, there was also this story about hundreds of reporters and other contributors to the Post, staffers at the Post, who sent a letter to Jeff Bezos trying to talk to him about saying that they're deeply alarmed by recent leadership decisions that have led readers to question the integrity of this institution, broken with a tradition of transparency, and prompted some of our most distinguished colleagues to leave, with more departures imminent. Now, that sounds like morale at the Post is pretty low. If you've got 400 staffers trying to, apparently this was meant to be a private message. It just leaked. It seems pretty dire over there.
Do they know that Breitbart is free?
Breitbart is free. And
it doesn't cost people who read Breitbart $1 to get that kind of slop. I mean, it strikes me as like, I feel like the average Trump supporter is it's almost like getting somebody to dial who's addicted to heroin to like dial back and like just be like, hey, why don't you pay for these joints? It's difficult because what they're gonna get from more things we would associate with just slop, like internet slop, right wing slop, is going to be more to what they've come to expect than this. This is not. Washington Post should have done this in 2016 if they wanted to.
Yeah,
I feel like when you hear stuff like this from publications or politicians or anything like that, where they want to reach people outside of the major metro area, the answer, it always seems to like cut one direction, right? Which is just that we need to be more like the Republicans. And surely that will be what brings them through the door. The answer is not to go into the dance hall and, try to play a different tune or get people to start dancing to your song. It is just to join them on the dance floor and, hope that you can charm them. And this like never works out. It also never cuts the other direction. It's never like, we need to try to appeal to the same base of people that support politicians like Bernie Sanders, for example. People who are further to the left of the Democratic Party, which, the last couple elections seem to show is also growing. That sort of different, I don't want to equate it to the Trump movement, but, a different expression of like a craving of populism, right? Or at the very least more socially democratic type policies. It never seems to work out, but it certainly doesn't stop them from sitting in the boardroom and coming up with these pie-in-the-sky plans.
In 2016, after the election, the basic idea was, oh no, the media missed Trump voters. We missed the Trump movement. Something flew out under our radar. We need to move to the right to reach those voters. And so then you had a bunch of, we talked to Trump voters in a coffee shop, and here's what they had to say kind of pieces. You had the New York Times reaching out and hiring people like Barry Weiss and Bret Stephens away from the Wall Street Journal to write for their opinion pages at the Times. And then what happened after the 2020 election was there was this sort of assessment where you had people in media being like, well, half the country believes the election was stolen. We need to figure out what's going on with that half of the country. And so we need to tap into that. And so,
right. So it's always
shift a little more
side
to the right. And then 2024 happens, and we're seeing the same sort of thing happen. So as Jared was saying, it does cut one way. There's never been an election that I'm aware of where people have gone, wow, we need to figure out how to find people on the left. It's assumed that that's their audience, but at the same time, these papers take that audience for granted. Take normie Democrats for granted, thinking, what are they going to do? Not read us? And then as we saw after they lost something like 250,000 digital subscriptions when they didn't endorse a candidate in the presidential race. Yeah, they're going to leave, and they probably should, because they're not being heard as customers first. That's what happens when I think you see this movement in one direction to always try to reach people who are never ever going to come to terms with these organizations. They're not going to go, okay, well, the Washington Post is good now. No, I mean, in 2020, after Fox News called Arizona for Biden, there were people saying Fox News is a tool of the left.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Oh yeah, I remember that very well.
Yeah, even saying that Biden won at all was causing people to go, I'm never watching Fox again. It's OAN and Newsmax for me. And so that's the thing. Those are the people you're playing with. They don't want just news that is tilted a certain way. They want news that plays to delusions, which is something that
news. That's not
yeah,
news.
it's not news. And that's the thing. It's not something that would be healthy for anyone. Just like this idea that MSNBC is the liberal equivalent of Fox News has always kind of irritated me, because while there's some over the top stuff that you might hear on some of the MSNBC primetime shows, it's pretty much a straight news network throughout the day, And if it was the equivalent of Fox News, you would have, this like sort of fan fiction approach to Democrats that I don't think they necessarily have. I mean, their morning show is hosted by a former Republican congressman.
Whenever the conversation comes around newspapers and interviewing people who are supposedly blue collar, you never see them like, well, we got to talk to some black women. Like you,
no,
right?
Of course not.
And there's a large group of people who vote overwhelmingly against Republicans every time, and have a large swath of them would be considered working class blue collar.
But we all know what they
Yeah.
mean when they're talking about.
But I just think it's. I just want to say that we just hear, oh, blue collar. Nobody seems to, on a mainstream level, call that out for what it is, and it's all humming underneath the surface on places like Blue Sky, which is a kind of a silo right now, even though I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I like Blue Sky too. Given that our options seem to be dwindling.
Yeah.
As far as social media is concerned, which is part of the same sort of problem. I mean, you've got these newspapers that are owned by Jeff Bezos. You've got Jeff Bezos and I can't remember the LA Times guy, Patrick Soon-Shiong. That's it. You've got Facebook, owned by Mark Zuckerberg. You've got X, owned by Elon Musk. There's a big information apparatus that exists to try to placate the right now, to differing extents. I mean, the argument that Facebook was ever not a conservative-leaning company will always kind of be something that I disagree with to a certain extent. I think since 2016, when they fired the humans who handled the trending timeline on Facebook, because there was a Gizmodo article that came out that said it might be biased against conservatives, and then the right kind of freaked out. Ever since then, I think Facebook has been conservative leaning, which is why so many conservative creators have succeeded on there. And so now it's just more overt with the moves that Zuckerberg has kind of rolled out in the past couple weeks. They've got their whole ecosystem set up, between, you've got Fox News, you've got these newspapers, you've got social media. It's really difficult for any sort of left-leaning points of view to make it through, it seems, these days. And definitely extremely hard for points of view that are straight up on the left, to the left of Democrats. That's considered out of bounds right now, basically, when it comes to mainstream media.
The New York Times has published two, what I call palace intrigue type articles, one on Stephen Miller, the other on Thomas Homan. I didn't make it all the way through the Stephen Miller one yet, but I did read the Thomas Homan one, and it's not until the very end where they're like, oh, by the way, he likes, white supremacist conspiracy theories about immigration too. Repeatedly describes him as a hardliner on immigration, instead of just like a nutcase. And I can't imagine the Stephen Miller one is that much better.
Well, I'll just say on the Miller front, because I did read it. My mother sent it to me, and so did Luke O'Brien, for two different reasons. My mom's like, "Oh, your guy is back," in a bad way, and Luke was like, "Look at this." It seems like it's written to tell you that Stephen Miller is a bad boy, but in such a way that would please him. Because he understands that he enjoys playing the role of provocateur, antagonist, whatever. At no point in reading it do you get the full breadth of his ideology, what it means in there. And this is the same group that did reporting. The New York Times did like 6 or 7 stories after I published on Stephen Miller's emails in 2019. So they know it's out there. They know that this guy reads Vidier and American Renaissance and whatever, God knows what else. At the time that came out, a lot of people were covering it that day, and I got really frustrated when the New York Times wouldn't. And I emailed Maggie Haberman directly, and I don't know why maybe I had a drink or something, but I was just out of the blue, and I was like, I'm come from a family of immigrants, and I'm so insulted that you're the only ones not covering this or whatever. And then she says, I'm from immigrant family too, and we're going to do something. Just stop it. It was like a very tense thing. And then next thing I knew, they did start reporting and it started to flow out. That led me to believe that Miller is shaping the reporting that comes out from the top people at the New York Times, the people like Maggie Haberman. He's a very valuable source, and they need to keep grinding out articles.
To the Times' credit, there is one mention in this piece that I think is worth kind of calling out for being straightforward. About halfway through, they're talking about his how he kind of survived all the Trump turnover. He was always stayed in the president's good graces. And so they do say, and his vision for immigration, including deeply restrictive and xenophobic policies, is now at the center of Mr. Trump's economic and cultural agenda. So it's like, okay, they did call him xenophobic. That's something. At the same time,
I'm telling you, Miller likes that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that Miller would disagree. He would probably be like, yes. What's always interesting to me about these sorts of stories is that they do include really good, important reporting. It's good to know that, it kind of opens up with, they're talking about how Miller sat down with Mark Zuckerberg he told Zuckerberg that he had an opportunity to reform America, but it would be on Trump's terms. And it's interesting to kind of see that and to get the picture of how guys like Zuckerberg are falling in line. And then it's also noted that it said earlier this month, Zuckerberg's political lieutenants previewed the changes to Mr. Miller in a private briefing. So these recent changes at Meta were essentially approved by Miller's team. And that tells us a lot about the sort of relationship between the tech industry and the new administration. That stuff is important. On the other hand, there was a line in there. It says that Miller is regarded as unusually intense and has been known to berate government officials he deemed obstructive. He has strongly held opinions even about minor matters like men's fashion, specifically fabrics, patterns, colors, and collars.
Cool.
What?
Cool.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's like that. I don't know that that's necessary. Cool. Okay. He has strong opinions about fashion. That's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
Now?
Why doesn't he open an account like that Dye Workwear guy?
I know.
He can just do that if that's where his ambitions end.
God, wouldn't that be great?
So you mentioned that some of these profiles, even some of the ones that make us groan, will still bring the goods, even if it's kind of buried. Comparing the first Trump era to where we are now, all newsroom turmoil aside, going back to the idea of giving credit where it may or may not be due, do you think that news media has learned anything? Which I feel like is kind of a loaded question for some people, but you've been writing about media for a long time. Are there any differences, positive or negative, between the first Trump era and sort of where media sits now? Has there really been that much of a change in terms of the actual product that you've seen?
I think that's a good question, and it's something where the problem with the New York Times now that was maybe slightly less of a problem in 2016, 2017 is framing, I think, and the framing of articles, framing of stories, the headlines that go along with it, because most people aren't going to read 3,000 words on Stephen Miller. you said you hadn't made it to the end, so that's just the reality of it. We don't all have the attention spans to sit down or the time to sit down and read every single word of every single article. So the framing is important. And I think that that's where there has been a change that is more, the framing is a little friendlier to Trump than it used to be.
So that's the lesson that they learned.
Yeah, I think
don't mess with Trump.
That's it. Yeah. The Stephen Miller piece, if you look at it, the photo that they put with it has Miller looking triumphant. It's headline Stephen Miller channeling Trump has built more power than ever. This is celebratory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Tom Homan piece as well was interesting in itself. It had a lot of information in there that was good to know. That Homan has met with tech executives to talk about using their tools to find undocumented immigrants. That's good information for the public to know, but I feel like it shouldn't be like a throwaway line in a story. It should be, this is a 5-alarm fire kind of situation. The framing seems to fit with what the Trump team wants.
Right.
Those two profiles did not paint either of those men as awful. Not that you have to have a piece that says that here is an awful man, but for instance, in the Homan piece, there was this weird focus that the New York Times did where it says, where he once signed off on transgender care guidelines in the Obama administration's targeted immigration policy, he now endorses far-right theories about immigration and elections. Now, I don't know why they brought up the trans stuff, and they come back to it later where they talk about how he signed a memo setting standards of care for transgender detainees. Now, those were still really restrictive standards that they put in place, and the Obama administration got a lot of criticism from transgender rights groups for not taking seriously enough the threats that trans detainees dealt with. But the Times is sort of bringing this up in this piece twice, I think, as sort of a way to be like, he used to be on the loony left and now he's on the right, even though it makes clear in other places that it's like, no, he's always been a hardliner, anti-immigration dude. And the fact that he signed off on some memo that basically all it said was that we won't outright violate your constitutional rights is so weird that's the sort of stuff that I feel like the Times sort of tries to inject into these stories to add this sense of transformation, this sense of, as the Washington Post might call it, riveting storytelling.
Bare minimum concerns about rights equals left wing.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we talk about newspapers, the other traditional media that seems to be changing slightly under the pressure of an incoming new administration is cable news, and a beleaguered medium that has really taken a severe beating due to changes in technology. And, just curious if you have kept up with some of the stuff that's, with CNN, MSNBC, the tones that they're using. I know that CNN in particular has had a kind of game of musical chairs in terms of, what they're doing and who they're promoting and whatever. Only Anderson Cooper seems to have a set place, him and maybe Aaron Burnett. I noticed in Oliver Darcy's newsletter also they talked about moving Jim Acosta to the sort of late night period. And he, of all the reporters on that network, had the biggest reputation of being a Trump critic. Previously, they got rid of Don Lemon. He had problems that were probably bigger than simply people not liking him over his Trump coverage, maybe. I don't know. But we do know he had a few scandals in his personal life. I'm just curious if you see changes happening there. And then of course, on MSNBC, they continue to bring in a glut of people who are once Republican and, now have kind of rebranded as a liberal voice.
Yeah, that's let's start with CNN. CNN, I think you've got a great point with how they seem to be just sort of playing musical chairs. I read the other day that Wolf Blitzer is apparently being moved to mornings or something like that, or that's news.
He's getting older, so maybe it's easier in the morning for him.
Yeah, I mean,
he goes on at 5 p.m. Mike.
I mean, who doesn't want to take a nice nap at 5 p.m. though? I'd rather get my whole day over with and then just be like, cool, the rest of my day is free. But yeah, so I mean, I think that both MSNBC and CNN are kind of in a rough spot. I was reading an article about how after election night, between election night and December 13th, primetime viewership of MSNBC was down 54% from pre-election.
Jesus.
And for CNN, it was down 45%. Fox News saw an increase in 13%. So I kind of understand that, the wanting to tune out, which they cited this poll. It says a poll conducted in early December found that about 7 in 10 Democrats say they are stepping back from political news. The percentage isn't as high for Republicans who have reason to celebrate Trump's victory. Still, about 6 in 10 Republicans say they felt the need to take some time off too, and the share for independents is similar. So you've got a lot of people who are just sick of the product that they're being served. And that, I think, is something that news organizations need to kind of grapple with, because there's this idea, at CNN, there was this idea that it's like people don't want opinions, people just want the news, the straight news. That's always the idea, where it's, hey, no, maybe we're too opinionated, maybe we need to just report the news. And then in the course of that, they don't just increase the amount of reporting that's done. No, they just keep doing the large panels, those discussions that don't go anywhere. The whole thing remains a big debate show. The only thing that changes is the people involved in it. And I think that on MSNBC and CNN, you've kind of seen that similarly, a shift to the right. Yeah. And at MSNBC, the president of MSNBC, Rashida Jones, not to be confused with the actress, is leaving. And yeah, so that's pretty. They're going through some stuff, And apparently, her last thing that she did before announcing that she was leaving was, I guess, that Rachel Maddow's show is going to come back to doing 5 nights a week through the first 100 days of Trump's term.
She's their biggest draw, so.
Yeah, and maybe that's the kind of stuff they need to do. If that is the case, maybe that's saying something about the type of audience that they should pursue. Instead of trying to do this, we're going to go with the former Republican who is now like, maybe Trump's gone too far.
The invisible Liz Cheney audience. But here, I guess the question is this. I mean, do you think that my impression, a lot of anti-Trump liberal older people who watch MSNBC are not particularly discerning about these things and really focused on how much they can't stand Trump. And they can't stand him for a lot of good reasons. They're often very smart people. In general, that is like, that's what they want. So it's not like they're sitting going, my show is not good. They're turning off. I thought of something. So I wound up watching MSNBC and CNN more while I was writing my book over the past year, only because I would work all night and I wasn't really online. And then I would need to catch up on what was going on with the campaign, because I was like, because it was complete chaos the whole time. And I was just trying to figure it out. So I would flip between CNN and MSNBC. Obviously I wasn't going to watch Fox for this. This was for my own pleasure. It wasn't like reporting. What I found were these kind of like Pollyanna monologues. If you think I think Lawrence O'Donnell is a good guy. I don't think he's a bad guy. I'm not here to rip him as a person, but like the way he was covering Biden, when I would see that, it was like, there's nothing to see here. And, is it possible that some of this audience feels burned now because they were towing like the kind of inside Democrat line, and now people realize that line, steered them into Trump again. And in terms of Biden, there was a legitimate cover up of his age.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly something to consider. I mean, I watched I watched a lot of CNN and then some MSNBC, in the run up to the election, and MSNBC definitely painted a rosier picture of the odds of Harris winning that didn't seem to match what I was seeing elsewhere, what I was seeing, in the seeing in the newspapers and seeing just in general on social media.
Or feeling online, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And on election night, I was watching Fox News because I hate myself. And at one point, I switched to MSNBC as it started to look like Harris was kind of gonna lose, and it was still kind of hopeful. And I feel like at a certain point, it felt like false hope. It felt like people were being sold on an entertainment product to make them feel okay, that didn't necessarily match the reality of the situation. And I think that is where, as we sort of talked about earlier, the product that people want sometimes isn't even news. It's entertainment. It's reassurance. We all want to hear that our worldview is the right one. That's why conservatives watch Fox, so that someone there can tell them, yes, what you believe is true. And I think that there's a segment of voters who watch, Lawrence O'Donnell's show on MSNBC because they wanted to feel comfort that Biden was still at the top of his game. There are still people who will argue Biden was totally fine. I feel like the reality of Biden's situation still hasn't sunk in for a lot of people. I think it's kind of sad, and I've seen this in some of the people on social media calling for recounts and calling for the use of the 14th Amendment to keep Trump out of office. All these sorts of pie in the sky kind of
It's
things.
sad,
because,
yeah.
And it's because their worldview is being disrupted by reality, and it sucks. It sucks to see something that is just so in your face, anti what you want to happen, and to also see people celebrating it. I think that adds another layer of frustration for a lot of people, and so I understand why people would tune out. I mean, I didn't watch because for whatever reason, I usually will watch Saturday Night Live after it airs.
You really do hate yourself.
But I know, because I hate myself. But I didn't watch the episode after the election because I was just like, I don't want to hear a jokey version of what just happened. Right. And and that's just me being someone who I understand media. I understand the function of satire and all of that there, and I'm still just like, I just don't want it. And I've found myself feeling that way about news in general, because it does feel like things are kind of darker. It does feel like things are going in a really scary direction, and that there aren't guardrails to kind of keep things on track. Guardrails that maybe were there in 2017 that aren't there now. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes watching cable news, especially news that's just telling you what's happening, sometimes feels like you're living in a horror film that's just never ending. You never get the relief that comes at the end of a film. Right. You're just there. You've got all the tension, and the tension builds up, and then you turn off your TV and you sit in bed and stare at the ceiling. It's rough, and I think that's that's something that I think cable news has to kind of grapple with to figure out what their audiences actually want, to stop chasing some sort of audience that they believe exists out there that maybe doesn't, like the Washington Post thinking that if it reaches some Cleveland firefighters, they can, go from 3 million to 200 million subscribers. I think that news organizations generally need to just try to do their best to tell people what's happening in the world as honestly as they can, and without making them feel horrible or without selling them something that doesn't exist.
It's challenging, but the question I just wanted to slip in there is, how likely would the Trump administration be to shape the direction of CNN and MSNBC? And I think that's where that's where I get more concerned, because they may be like kind of wet noodle news coverage sometimes, or discussions like those, particularly the ones where you'll have like 6 people around table just shouting over each other. It's like, I don't even know what value some of that stuff has. But we may be looking back on it nostalgically if it becomes a completely censored product.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. There's a real chance that we'll kind of end up in this, the sort of position that, countries like Hungary kind of find themselves in, where there's censorship of the media, and it might be willing censorship. It might be that the Trump administration leans on CNN to cover something a certain way, or leans on, the New York Times to, there are all sorts of things you can use as leverage to try to get what you want. It could be, okay, Stephen Miller won't give you information that you want moving forward if you're going to report in a certain way, or you're going to frame things a certain way. And or it could be, Trump having the head of the FCC go after, media properties that make him angry. These are things he's said that he wants to do. So I think that we'll have a sort of unofficial authoritarian media environment where it's technically free, but there's going to be a lot of pressure to kind of tell the news in Trump-friendly terms.
So as we're wrapping up here, rather than really getting into and ripping apart right-wing media, which has spent the last couple months spiking the football into the ground over and over again, disturbing the Earth's gravitational balance, I want to channel one of my favorite reporters, Chris Cillizza. Get your take on the winners and losers of right-wing media today. For example, I think a loser of right-wing media is Laura Loomer, who got more access than she ever deserved, but was ultimately cast away like a broken toy. Once the scrutiny got a little too hot on her relationship to Trump and rumors started circulating. A winner of right-wing media that I see is Tim Pool. I think Tim Pool has had a couple really good years. He seems to be spiraling out a little bit at the moment, and we might have to do an episode with Bob Silverman sometime in the next month or two. But what's your take, Parker? Who are the winners and losers of right-wing media right now?
I think one of the winners is Charlie Kirk. I mean, he's
huge.
He's gained this level of legitimacy that he didn't have. He was quoted in the New York Times piece about Stephen Miller.
Yes, he was.
He pops up all over the place. He was one of the people that Meta reached out to bounce the new policies off of before they announced them. He has a level of access that he's never had before, and he's treated with a level of legitimacy that he has never seen before. So that's a winner. When it comes to losers in right-wing media, I think it might honestly just be the Newsmaxes of the world, because there are all these conservative influencers out there who kind of pick up the more extreme than what Fox News is going to say kind of area. And I feel like that's kind of cutting into Newsmax's audience generally. So I think that winner, Charlie Kirk; loser, Newsmax.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't see as much like campaign outreach as you did in 2020 with like the Newsmax or Right Side Broadcasting Network. There's a lot of like social media influencers and live streams that seem to sort of fill the void.
And also, I mean, they now have the mainstream social media platforms kind of in their back pocket. They benefit from this, from all of this. From obviously Elon Musk taking over Twitter has kind of turned Twitter into a very right-wing environment. They've always done well on Facebook. YouTube, I just saw, they also announced that they're going to kind of roll back Google's going to roll back their fact-checking stuff as well. So I think that to add to my list of losers, I think that the right-wing social media sites, your Truth Socials, your Gab, your whatever's out there, I think that those kind of lose influence as the mainstream ones become what those used to be.
No, you took my loser because I was going to say Andrew Torba of Gab, because what is left there but people who have swastikas tattooed literally on their face? I mean, because the more Truth Social becomes mainstream, like what was Truth Social becomes our mainstream media, right? In social. The whole purpose of Gab was to find an alternative for a liberal social media where they could go around talking about persecuting every single person and including non-persons like for example pit bulls, right? Like they wanted to kill pit bulls on Gab for a while. It was a totally unhinged site, but what's its sales pitch at this point? But I'll pick another one, loser, which is Nick Fuentes, because Nick not only opposed Trump, bad bet, but also planned a bunch of stunts around Groyper Wars, where he's going to bring all his guys to harassing, and that worked on Charlie Kirk in 2019. If people know that story, where he sent a bunch of his fans to torment Charlie Kirk on, I guess it was a book tour or like a TPUSA tour. I can't recall immediately, but he couldn't summon the numbers anymore, and his sort of his stereotype of a basement dwelling audience that doesn't go anywhere was reinforced during the campaign, and now he's kind of his supposed principled stance against Trump because he's not anti-Semitic enough or whatever. I don't think it's sitting well with people who could be part of his fans. And the winner I was going to pick, sadly, is Jack Posobiec, who now no longer needs to say 1488 or do any kind of Nazi stuff. He can just sort of toss out a lot of half-assed tweets that are basic garbage and call it a day and make money. So he has officially embedded himself somehow of that group of people who are considered alt-right coming into the election of 2016. He has somehow turned himself into an insider, and kind of sad.
We've been speaking with Parker Malloy, and Parker, I heard you have the goal of getting 200 million paid subscribers to your newsletter, The Present Age.
That is my goal.
So we'll see what our audience can do on that front.
Yeah, I feel like I'm about as likely to hit it as the Washington Post, but we'll see.
Everyone should subscribe to Parker's newsletter. Before I even had a Substack account, I was signed up.
Well, Parker, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us about media. Really valuable insight and perspective, as always. We're going to keep reading your newsletter. Listeners of the show, go sign up for it. It's great stuff.
I just want to say thanks for having me. It's, I like your podcast, and I'm glad to have been on it.
Yeah, well, we'll have you back.